history is often propelled by a series of specific, sometimes even accidental, events. Consider the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022, the Palestine-Israel conflict in 2023, and the rapid collapse of Syria's Assad regime by 2025. These great changes, unseen in a century, have deepened and broadened, making the world an even more tumultuous place, marked by numerous historically significant events. Think of Trump's reckless tariff war, the intense aerial conflict between India and Pakistan, and the fierce confrontation between the US and Houthi forces. Each of these incidents is altering, or rather, correcting our perception of the world. For instance, due to the Indo-Pakistani air war, Indonesia directly halted its plans to purchase French Rafale fighter jets. Egypt, too, adjusted its plans to acquire South Korean F-50 fighters. These events have had a particularly significant impact on the United States, forcing it to re-evaluate China, India, and indeed the entire world and, of course, to take a hard look at itself. Consequently, the US has been compelled to make adjustments to its domestic and foreign policies. On May 23rd, US Vice President J.D. Vance delivered a speech at the 2025 graduation ceremony of the US Naval Academy. This speech was packed with information, seemingly heralding major adjustments for the US, perhaps even a retreat to a secondary role. Vance began by referencing President Trump's trip to the Middle East, highlighting what he considered the most important takeaway from the visit. He said, "This marks the end of decades of our foreign policy approach, and I believe it breaks with the precedent set by our founding fathers." He continued, "Our foreign policy has undergone a long experiment, attempting to support other nations or interfere in their affairs through military strength and alliance systems, even when these foreign nations have little to do with America's core interests." What does this mean? To put it bluntly, he was saying that US foreign policy has been deeply flawed for a long time, getting entangled into many overseas conflicts with little connection to core American interests, thereby squandering national resources. This was a clear veiled criticism of Presidents Bush, Obama, and Biden. Coincidentally, a day later, Trump expressed similar views at West Point. He stated that for at least 20 years, US leaders had dragged the military into missions that wasted our time, money, and souls. Bush launched the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Obama also invested heavily in military power overseas. And the Biden administration provided unrestrained support to Ukraine. The Trump team, however, feels this money was poorly spent. Why? Because, as Vance explained, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the US was unbeatable, the undisputed global power. But it quickly became complacent, not only abandoning the production of cars, computers, and weapons, but also spending lavishly on promoting democracy in the Middle East, ultimately gaining nothing and suffering huge losses. Vance concluded regretfully, the era of American dominance over the seas, air, and space is over. The time when US leadership was unchallenged is long gone. The United States and its military must accept this reality. He also noted that cheap drones, readily available cruise missiles, and cyber attacks can all cause enormous damage to the United States. So, let's consider, whose drones are the cheapest? Whose cruise missiles are readily available? Whose cyber attack capabilities are the strongest? My guess would be the Houthis. It seems the US military has suffered considerably at their hands. However, Vance ultimately shifted the blame to China and Russia, stating that the US faces serious threats from China, Russia, and other countries, and emphasized that America must maintain its leading edge in technology. Why would Vance suddenly deliver such a disheartening speech for Americans and a demoralizing one for America's allies? On one hand, the Trump team has always pursued an America First policy. On the other hand, recent US experiences have only strengthened this conviction. What is America First? Some say its essence is American hegemony. That sounds plausible but misses the point. Since its founding, the US has always prioritized its own interests. That's self-evident. When Trump specifically emphasizes America First, he's actually targeting his own allies. Why? Because Trump believes these allies are freeloading, taking advantage of the US, and getting a free ride at America's expense. Trump's emphasis on America First precisely indicates that American hegemony is in trouble. The old ways of reaping dividends through dominance are no longer working smoothly. The US itself is burdened by debt, and its industrial hollowing out is severe. Simply put, there isn't enough meat to go around, so now they're not even willing to share the broth with their underlings. Worse things might be yet to come. In early 2025, Trump began implementing his America First policy. However, after throwing a flurry of wild punches, he himself ended up bruised and battered. He originally thought he could mediate the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 24 hours, that creating an efficiency department DOGE would cut the deficit by $2 trillion, that a tariff war would make all countries submit, and that 2 aircraft carriers and 7 beta bombers could intimidate the Houthis. As it turned out, not a single one of these objectives was achieved. The biggest blows to Trump were the 3 aforementioned issues: the failure of the tariff war, the Indo-Pakistani conflict, and the unsuccessful campaign against the Houthis. Trump, perhaps a bit more introspective than India's Modi, realized he needed to reflect. His reflection led him to conclude that America wasn't first enough and needed to double down. China's trade counteroffensive hit Trump hard. He reportedly sat by the phone expectantly for over a month, but it never rang. On May 21st, US Secretary of Commerce Lutnick indicated that Trump was terrified of China's tariff retaliation. Trump wasn't just scared, he was furious. Furious at whom? At the think tank advisors who gave him the ideas. On May 23rd, in a fit of anger, Trump fired the entire White House National Security Council team responsible for China affairs. The order was sudden, demanding their immediate departure. They were given only 30 minutes from notification to clearing their desks and leaving. Many broke down on the spot. Why was Trump so angry? Because this battle was humiliating, the loss too ugly. He felt it was the faulty intelligence from these idiots that led to his gross misjudgment. He seriously suspected these people were moles from China's Strategic Deception Bureau Zhonhuyu. 20 days earlier, Trump had already fired their leader, National Security Advisor Huang Zhihan. Trump bluntly told the media, all those stupid ideas came from him. This Huang Zhihan was an anti-China vanguard, vividly illustrating the zeal of a new convert. Besides him, 6 other China hawks were purged, including David Faith, who spearheaded the chip blockade. It's crucial to note they weren't fired for being extremely anti-China, but for providing erroneous intelligence that put Trump in an embarrassing position. What Trump needs are extreme anti-China hawks who understand both sides and can formulate correct anti-China policies. But Trump faces a dilemma. Those anti-China hawks who truly understand China are, in effect, America's capitulationists because they know the US simply cannot win against China. Therefore, for Trump, not provoking China is actually the most rational choice. After the US-China tariff war, let's discuss the US Houthi clashes in the Red Sea. Since this round of the Israel-Palestine conflict erupted, the Houthi forces have surprisingly become the most effective anti-Israel fighting force, employing highly flexible tactics, completely adapting to the enemy. You fight your way, I'll fight mine. Besides directly attacking Israeli targets with missiles, the Houthis' most potent tactic has been blockading the Red Sea shipping lanes, prohibiting all Israel-related vessels. This infuriated Israel's #1 backer, the United States. Losing face, the US tried to form a coalition of 20 countries for escort missions, but in the end, it was mainly the US doing the escorting. Initially, a few destroyers were sent, but they were quickly overwhelmed. The Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group was then deployed, but the situation remained a stalemate, with persistent rumors of the carrier being hit, which the US constantly had to deny. In September 2024, the captain of the USS Eisenhower, still shaken, lamented in a media interview that they had completed the most dangerous and challenging mission faced by the US Navy since the Korean War. Saudi Arabia was reportedly delighted to hear this, thinking, our 10-nation coalition losing to the Houthis back then wasn't so disgraceful after all, considering even the US can't handle them. They probably had to celebrate with a few drinks that night. Since then, the USS Lincoln and USS Roosevelt aircraft carriers also sailed to the Red Sea, but mostly retreated in disarray. This round of US Houthi conflict dates back to Trump's second term. On his first day in office, Trump designated the Houthis as a terrorist organization. Having received substantial funds from Jewish donors during his campaign, Trump naturally had to deliver on his promises. By early March 2025, the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement expired. Israel refused to fulfill its commitment to withdraw troops from Gaza and did not participate in the second phase of negotiations. The Israel-Palestine conflict flared up again. On March 11th, the Houthis announced a renewed ban on all Israel-related ships transiting the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and Bab el-Mandab Strait. This ban had been temporarily lifted due to the initial ceasefire. Trump, apparently under orders from Israel, felt he had to teach the Houthis a lesson and began planning a strike. The White House even called this plan the most important military operation of Trump's second term. To combat the Houthis, Trump went all out this time, deploying not only to carrier strike groups, but also 1/3 of his B-2 stealth bomber fleet, 7 aircraft and 9 KC-135 tankers to the Indian Ocean. After more than a month of fighting, the US lost 3 F-18 Super Hornets, which crashed into the sea. You could argue they weren't shot down by the Houthis, but the chaos the Houthis caused for the US military was undeniable. During this period, the Houthis shot down 7 MQ-9 Reaper drones, bringing their cumulative total to over 20. Based on the US military's unit cost of about $35 million, that's a loss of nearly $250 million for 7 drones, or $700 million for 20. So, this fight was incredibly frustrating for the US, unable to win, yet incurring mounting losses. They were losing sleep over it. By early May, the US couldn't take it anymore and had to negotiate with the very terrorists they had designated, even reaching a ceasefire agreement. They had no choice. What if the USS Carl Vinson was sunk? That would be even more humiliating. The outcome was that the US stopped attacking the Houthis, and the Houthis stopped attacking US ships. Why is this considered a US loss? Because the US attacked the Houthis primarily to retaliate on Israel's behalf. Yet now, the Houthis continue to attack Israel and ban Israel-related shipping, while the US has become a timid bystander. On May 13th, the Houthis struck Israel's Ben Gurion airport with a hypersonic missile. On May 22nd, they attacked the airport twice more. On May 25th, Houthi hypersonic missiles directly disrupted operations at the airport. Despite repeated Houthi attacks on Israel, the US truly acted like a coward, pulling its head into its shell. Moreover, the US proactively engaged with Iran, for which Trump reportedly had a fierce argument with Netanyahu. Truly, as the saying goes, no dutiful son remains by the bedside of a long-ailing parent. The conflict with the Houthis left Trump deeply frustrated because he discovered the sharp sword in his hand was turning into a mere fire poker. Meanwhile, in the Indo-Pakistani conflict, Pakistan, relying on Chinese weaponry, beat India so badly it didn't know which way was up, leaving the US military aghast. It was precisely the failure of the US-China tariff war, the setback in the military campaign against the Houthis, and the impressive performance of Chinese weapons in the Indo-Pakistani conflict that heightened the Trump team's sense of crisis and further solidified their America First conviction. I believe Vance's speech can be compared to Churchill's 1946 Iron Curtain speech. Churchill's speech is considered the beginning of the US-Soviet Cold War, while Vance's speech at the Naval Academy signifies America's comprehensive strategic contraction. This US strategic retreat is a major turning point in these great changes unseen in a century. What are these great changes unseen in a century? It's shorthand for profound changes unseen in 100 years. So, what exactly does that mean? Let's use a process of elimination. If a civil war breaks out in an African country, with both sides fighting fiercely, does that count as a centennial change? Clearly not. Brexit? No. Even if the entire EU collapsed, it wouldn't qualify. The Russia-Ukraine conflict? Definitely not. Even if Russia annexed all of Ukraine, it wouldn't be a centennial change. Earthquakes in Myanmar, the fall of Assad's regime in Syria, these are major events, but they don't seem to fit the bill. Even the collapse of the Soviet Union, one of the 20th century's biggest historical events, seems a stretch to call a centennial change, as life for people in other parts of the world continued much as before, and the fundamental global structure didn't change. Let's continue. If humanity experienced a fourth technological revolution, fundamentally altering societal life, would that be great changes unseen in a century? Let me give you an example. Once, there was a village bully who dominated through brute strength and hired thugs. Everyone had to pay him protection money or face beatings. Later, a technological revolution occurred in the village. Ordinary families acquired knives and spears, but still couldn't defeat the bully because he and his thugs now had firearms. The dynamic of the bully oppressing villagers remained unchanged. Later still, when villagers also got firearms, the bully acquired tanks and armored vehicles. You still couldn't beat him. Similarly, when you get tanks, he gets missiles and atomic bombs, always staying one step ahead. What does this illustrate? As long as the bully's power isn't overthrown, no matter how advanced technology becomes, the village dynamic of bully oppressing villagers won't change. Conversely, only when the villagers overthrow the bully's rule and reshape the village structure can it be called a fundamental change. The same applies to our global village. The bully in the global village is the US and the West. The oppressed and exploited are the third world countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This state has existed for centuries. Only when this state is completely altered can it be called great changes unseen in a century. The phrase great changes unseen in a century was first introduced on December 28, 2017 by our national leader at the annual meeting of Chinese and foreign envoys. He said, "Currently, China is in its best development period since modern times, and the world is undergoing great changes unseen in a century. These two are synchronously intertwined and mutually reinforcing." Tracing it back further, on August 29, 2014, the leader proposed the concept of unprecedented great changes, stating that the current international situation is at a new historical turning point. What happened around 2014? The US was already implementing its pivot to Asia strategy and accelerating TPP negotiations, while China proposed the Belt and Road Initiative and was formulating the Made in China 2025 plan. Just 3 months after the formal introduction of great changes unseen in a century, the US-China trade war broke out. So, my understanding is that centennial changes refers to the realization of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, which in turn will thoroughly reverse or fundamentally shift the balance of power between East and West. The introduction of the Great Changes concept is highly significant, primarily for its foresight. It inspires us to think, enhances our awareness of potential challenges, and allows us to prepare and deploy resources proactively. Look, after Great Changes was proposed, we completed land reclamation in the South China Sea, launched warships one after another like dumplings dropping into a pot, formulated the Made in China 2025 plan, proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, and established the China Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund. We started planning all these before the trade war even began. Next, an important question. When will these great changes unseen in a century reach a conclusion? By definition, it's when things basically stabilize and stop changing. It's like the village bully being overthrown, crippled, killed, or reformed. Then the village situation completely stabilizes. The same logic applies to the global village. We aim to comprehensively shift the balance of power in the global village, leading the US in all aspects: economic, military, technological, political, and cultural. I believe there are two key timeframes, 2035 and 2049. Why 2035? Because the 19th Party Congress laid out plans to basically achieve socialist modernization by 2035. In manufacturing, we aim to achieve the second stage goals of the Made in China 2025 plan. By 2035, our economic output will definitely surpass that of the US, possibly 1.2 to 1.5 times larger. Our technological level will be globally leading. Problems like lithography machines and civil aviation engines will have been completely overcome. All the jewels in the crown of global industry will have been plucked by us. The Taiwan issue will also be resolved. By 2049, our GDP should be more than double that of the US, and our manufacturing value added could account for over half the global total. By then, the US and Chinese economies will be highly complementary, and US-China relations will be very stable. Most interestingly, the US and India might compete for our favor, vying with each other to please us. This isn't me boasting. This is based on our plans and confidence. Our success relies on our own efforts and struggles, not on hoping for a better external environment. We have a good business environment, strong infrastructure capabilities, enviable STEM talent, a vast free market, unwavering strategic resolve, and the spirit of if it doesn't kill you, compete to the death. Behind all this is the strong leadership of the party, a stable social order, powerful cohesion and centripetal force, a profound cultural and spiritual heritage, and the superiority of socialism in concentrating resources to accomplish major tasks. As the US increasingly deals with China, they will encounter more setbacks. After each US-China confrontation, they have to readjust their perception of China. One day, they will have to accept the fact that the Chinese people are invincible. Actually, there are clear-headed people in the US. On August 31, 2020, the renowned American think tank, the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation (TIF), released a report titled A Strategic Framework for Competing with China. The report pointed out that China is the world's largest economy, the world's largest supplier, and the world's toughest competitor, as well as America's main geopolitical rival. The report also concluded that the US can no longer contain China and that China surpassing the US is a historical inevitability, though US-China competition will persist for a long time. This process is essentially America's historical journey from rejecting China to accepting China. This journey can be divided into 5 stages: denial, anger, frustration, bargaining, and acceptance. Great Britain went through this process when accepting America's rise. Now it's America's turn to face China's rise. After experiencing the tariff war, the US Houthi clashes, and the ensuing conflicts, I estimate Trump and Vance are nearing the frustration, depression stage. They can't win, but they're unwilling to admit defeat. What is that? If not frustration, however, frustration has degrees. When they are thoroughly frustrated, they will move to the bargaining stage. Reaching this stage means America has accepted its fate, content to be number 2. Though they'll want favorable terms. Of course, there are no clear boundaries between stages. While frustrated, the US might still exhibit denial, anger, or attempt bargaining. For the US and Europe, even knowing China's rise is unstoppable, they will try to slow it down. Although Trump won't engage in direct hard confrontation with China in the short term, he will certainly resort to other tactics, such as covertly tripping us up or instigating conflicts between other countries and China. In short, any dirty trick is possible. Regardless, China's most difficult times are behind us. Vance's speech shows that America's strategic contraction is basically a settled matter. In the future, the main targets of US bullying might shift towards Europe, Japan, and India. America's main strategies going forward will be, first, to find ways to slow down China's pace of surpassing them. And second, to focus on striking at the world's 3rd and 4th ranked countries to ensure they can at least maintain a top 2 position. For China, these great changes unseen in a century are full of both opportunities and challenges. But as long as we unswervingly develop at our own pace, relying on our own strengths, I believe we will achieve our goals by the key milestones of 2035 and 2049. Realizing the dream of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, thoroughly changing the power structure of the global village, and allowing China to once again stand at the very center of the world stage.